We've been making loads of recipe videos lately, so instead of making food, this time let's talk about eating it. Food is the reason that some of us get out of bed so happily in the morning. It's the thing that nourishes us. It fuels us. It keeps us going. It's what warrants a midday break. It brings us together. It creates warmth, a welcoming feeling of community and a sense of belonging. It can bring back memories and transport us to faraway places. It brings happiness, comfort, and sometimes struggle. Sometimes it can be a real struggle whether to eat this food or that. That food is bad, but this food is good. Maybe just one bite of that food. I mean, it's not a big deal. It's just one bite. Shit. I think this food is gonna have to be forbidden from here on out, and it might be time for a diet. The diet mentality isn't something that affects only people who have or do follow diets. It also affects anybody who puts conditions on the way that they eat. Like saying, for example, I can only eat that food if I then go and exercise afterwards. That's the diet mentality. Or I can't eat that food because it's too high in carbs or fat. That's the diet mentality. Dieting or limiting certain food groups, or even just labeling foods as good or bad, is pretty characteristic in people who struggle in their relationship with food. And let's be honest, calorie counting or carb and fat restricting or keeping track of our weight, these things just make us feel pretty miserable. It can make us reflect on our own self-image really harshly. And people might be using diets because it might be the only tool they've ever known to lose weight. But most often, people who lose weight on a diet gain it back plus more within the first 5 years. Diets don't just mess with us physically, it also messes with us mentally and emotionally, and I think that can be so much more harmful. And to be honest, I really don't like to talk about weight on this channel. Like, having worked as a dietitian myself, I do understand the importance or the connection between managing body weight in relation to certain health conditions, but aside from that, I think that discussions about weight are what fuel the diet culture and that diet mentality. I think it's so much more important to focus our attention on creating a healthy and trusting and nourishing relationship with food. I think this practice is what over the long term brings us to a healthy and optimal weight, but just as a positive side effect, not as the primary focus. Now, what if I was to tell you that the anti-diet, or the solution to maintaining a healthy weight, if that's what you're looking for, but more importantly, to create a healthy mindset and relationship with food, what if I told you that you already knew the answer to that since the day you were born? Because as babies, we used to eat incredibly in tune with our hunger and fullness. When a baby is hungry, it cries for food. And if you've ever seen a baby who's being pressured to drink or eat when it's full, you'll see the little one push away that food with force. But over time, we kind of lose this innate ability to tune into ourselves. And maybe that's because of a few different reasons. Maybe we've learned to finish our plate even when we're feeling full. Or maybe our lives are pretty chaotic and we're constantly chasing either deadlines or kids, and that's making us neglect our body signals. Or maybe because we've learned that food can soothe us and distract us when we're feeling emotional. So it's only natural that we've kind of lost touch with our inner child, but we can relearn to eat intuitively. So the whole concept of intuitive eating was first presented by two dietitians who studied this and they made it their life's work. A lot of the information that I'm going to be sharing today comes from their audiobook called Intuitive Eating. Before we dive in, I do want to thank Audible for partnering with us on today's video, but we're going to chat more about them at the end. For now, I just want to say that the whole concept of intuitive eating, it is a process that takes time. These are not quick fix solutions, but if you do keep at it with time, it shows a lot of promise. People who follow intuitive eating notice more body appreciation and self-compassion, trust, and higher self-esteem. And eventually, a lot of people also find a gradual return to a balanced and healthy weight, if that's something that's important to you. So let's kind of dive into a couple principles of intuitive eating, and then I'll share some resources with you that I hope will help to guide you along the journey. You might have heard of the expression before, what gets measured gets managed. I personally love the expression. I think it holds very true. And I think it's expressions like this one that encourage some people to measure their weight or to track their intake by counting calories or macros. One thing that's important to know is that these tools help us measure external variables. And so that means that often it's not helping us stay in tune with what's happening inside of our bodies. If anything, they might even make us neglect those inner signals. But I do get the allure of using tools because they give us a sense and a feeling of control. They let us know whether or not we're making improvements. So instead of tracking our weight or calories, there's another tool that we can use to manage our intake, and it's a tool I personally think is a lot more powerful. So one of the key principles of intuitive eating is to listen to our body's signals for hunger and fullness. And a tool that we can use to measure this is the hunger and fullness scale. So essentially it's these numbers from 0 to 10, where 0 on the scale is intense, uncomfortable hunger, kind of when you feel empty and totally famished. And then 10 on the scale is when you feel uncomfortably full, like painfully, to the point of maybe even feeling sick. So let's first start with the hunger side of things. Sometimes if you ask somebody, what does it feel like to you when you feel hungry? The answer you might get is something like, I feel irritable or lightheaded or dizzy. These symptoms indicate that that person might be at a 1 or 2 on the scale. And when you're in that state, what kind of foods do you usually crave? Because usually I find it's the most sweet or deep fried, rich, dense, indulgent foods that we can get our hands on. And because we're so hungry, we're more likely to scarf down the plate, eating really quickly, and that can often swing us to a 9 or 10 on the fullness side of the scale. And this yo-yoing between 0 and 10 is often what we see in people who binge and restrict. These higher and lower values, they just bring us feelings of discomfort. It doesn't feel very nice to be so hungry and then to be so full. So the proposed solution here is to eat when you're feeling a gentle or polite hunger, which is usually about 3 to 4 on that scale. When we eat when we feel a gentle hunger, we tend to be more rational with our food choices, maybe even making more wholesome food choices because we're not so famished. We also then tend to eat more slowly. We really take our time to enjoy the food. As a result, we're more mindful, able to tune in and recognize when we're starting to feel comfortably full, which tends to be at around the 6 to 7 range on the scale, which is where we would also ideally want to put a pause on eating. And we might not always follow it and stop there, and that's okay. The most important thing is that we start to understand fullness and what it can feel like to be comfortably full. If you come from a history of dieting, you might have learned to suppress those feelings of hunger and fullness. You might not even feel them anymore. That's completely normal and natural. It is possible to relearn it, but it does take time. So to guide you, we've created a free downloadable PDF. The link is in the description box for that, but it's something we're going to delve into a little bit more at the end of the video. Another one of the principles of intuitive eating, which is my favorite, is to make peace with food. And that's just kind of encompassing getting rid of this feeling of guilt and shame and fear around eating, especially when eating foods that some people might call unhealthy or bad. And at Pickup Limes, we really don't like to look at foods in such a binary way. When we tell ourselves that we can't have a certain food, it makes us mentally more preoccupied with that particular food, a little bit more obsessed with it. It gives it power that it really doesn't deserve. But if we instead give ourselves permission to eat any food, to be at peace with it, those foods start to lose their allure. So the idea here is to give yourself permission to eat anything, so long as you're staying attuned. And by attuned, I mean just what we've talked about, listening to your body, eating when politely hungry, stopping when comfortably full. Before we kind of go further, I feel like I need to say that I was so skeptical about this point when I first learned about it, because I felt like it was just promoting a junk food diet, and that with that kind of permission, without any boundaries or restrictions, that it meant that you would lose all control. But the exact opposite is true. I remember the first time I decided to give the concept a try, I bought chips and chocolate to bring home, foods that I had previously not let myself bring at home at all. And to be honest, the first few times I did overeat them, but even still, I kind of mustered up the courage to trust the process, and I kept bringing them into the house. And then at some point, I don't know, maybe a few weeks, maybe a few months later, I was sitting on the couch and I was in the mood for a snack. And then I remembered that we had 2 bags of chips and 4 chocolate bars in the pantry. But then I realized I also wasn't in the mood for those things, and I kind of wanted an orange instead. The chips that were once so exciting were things that I kind of got exposed to over and over again, and I kind of just habituated to it. So when we make the donut as emotionally equivalent as the apple, for example, The donut loosens its grip over us. It makes the food emotionally neutral. By allowing the foods to be there, by permitting ourselves to have them, maybe we will overeat them at first. But eventually that novelty wears off and it gives us the permission to actually taste the food for what it is and to judge if we're even in the mood to have it at all. So our motto here at Pickup Limes is that food is there to nourish the cells, but also to nourish the soul. And like a toddler, we no longer need to think about what we should be eating or feeling guilty about what we've just eaten. We can just enjoy the pleasure that we get from food, and when we're satisfied, just move on. So these are just some of the principles of intuitive eating. There's 10 guiding principles in total. I first read the book Intuitive Eating by dietitians Elise Resch and Evelyn Tribble when I was in university, and then I refreshed my knowledge of it by listening to the audiobook version. And it's an incredible audiobook, very grounding with loads of exercises to prompt reflection and better understanding of the concepts. They cover things like not using food as a reward or punishment. They discuss challenging the food police. They cover body image topics. So if you're looking to delve deeper into intuitive eating, if eating is something that you have or do struggle with and you feel like you could use some extra support, you're essentially going to have 2 dietitians explaining and exploring the concepts with you, guiding you through the whole process. So if you're interested in learning more or checking out the audiobook for yourself, you can get it for free, or any other audiobook that you'd like, plus a 30-day free membership of Audible by visiting audible.com/pickuplimes, or check out the link in the description box below. And Audible members now get 1 free audiobook per month plus 2 free Audible originals. And the other resource I wanted to let you know about is the one I've mentioned, which is the downloadable PDF that we created. It's completely free. The link for that is also in the description box below. And essentially, it's just a tool that you can use to check in with yourself, especially before and after meals, to see what number you're at on that hunger fullness scale. There's also some other questions in there to help you kind of just become more in tuned, more mindful. So I hope that you find it helpful. I'm curious what you think about the whole concept of intuitive eating. Is it something that's new to you? Have you learned of it before? Do you think you'd be willing to give it a try? Do you have any reservations about any of the kind of topics and things that we explored? I welcome you to share that in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, it always means a lot when you take a second to give it a thumbs up. Thanks a lot for watching. Pickup Limes signing off. We'll see you in the next video.